This is a late start to this vlog. Whoops. Hey y'all, so the plan for this vlog is a nonfiction November reading vlog, as you can see from the title. It's November 9th and I've actually already finished my first book. I wanted to update y'all before this, but unfortunately for me, I got a cold and that knocked me down for about a week, and then right after getting over my cold, I ended up having jury duty, so it's been a fun week and a half for me, not to mention my job is just insanely busy. Yeah, I have not had a lot of time to film. I'm currently actually behind on my filming and editing plan for the month. That's great. Anyway, as I said, I already finished one book for this readathon, and that was You Can't Be Serious by Penn. This fulfilled the prompt of record because although I have always known Penn as a comedian, turns out he actually worked for the White House in the Office of Public Engagement. So this was kind of a play on like on or off the record. See what I did there? And I have to say, holy crap, this was freaking hilarious. I was in stitches. Penn reads the audiobook, and I highly, highly recommend using that as a medium for reading this because it was so good. The tone, the inflection, the personality he really put into the story, like it all just jumps off in his reading. It was fantastic. It made me love this so much. Honestly, I think this may be one of the best memoirs I've ever read. Something that I really appreciate in the layout of this memoir is the fact that he goes at things in a chronological order. He starts from when he's born and he moves up until the current time in his life. And I don't know why, I just really appreciate the fact that he did that. It made it so much easier for me to follow the story. It also made it so much easier for me to understand his background and see how his experiences influenced him. Plus, once he eventually starts talking about his career in Hollywood, it really helped me to see the differences in his experience later down the line versus when he first got started. Like I said, I've always known him as a comedian, so the fact that he used to work for the White House was pretty shocking, but I will say I was fascinated by that whole element of the story, how he became involved in politics, how he started working in the Office of Public Engagement. The specific sectors he worked with was for the arts, young adults, and AAPI individuals. I especially loved seeing how his career as an actor affected his career as a politician's aide. That was so entertaining. Anytime those two careers would overlap, it was hilarious. I will say he's not shy about his political beliefs. Personally, I don't really mind that, probably because our political beliefs align, but I can see that possibly being an issue for other readers, so I'm just putting that out there. Something that did catch my attention, however, was the fact that Penn never really dives into his sexuality. Penn is gay, as far as I'm aware. He does have a fiance, and honestly, he only really gets into it by telling us when he met his fiance, a little bit about how they started dating, and that's about it. This just sort of surprised me because I thought he would have been able to really discuss the inclusivity of being an Asian American actor who is also gay. But then I actually watched a video interview he did with Dr. Mike right around the same time I was reading this book. I'll put a link to that in the cards if you're interested. It is very funny. But he actually discussed how when he was in Hollywood, he was so focused on just trying to get a seat at the table, being a person of color, that oftentimes his sexuality literally never came into play because people would be too hung up on the fact that he was Indian. Like I said, I do think it would have been interesting to hear his perspective on inclusivity in Hollywood, but at the same time, once I heard that in the separate interview, it made perfect sense why he never really looked at anything from that angle, because oftentimes he was having to deal with the fact that he was getting typecast or stereotyped because of the color of his skin. As I said though, I freaking loved this. It was so much fun. A fantastic start to my reading month because this baby came out to 5 stars. Oh my god. Yeah, highly recommend it. Now I want to go try and watch all of his movies, which I've never seen before. Also found out that apparently he is in the new The Santa Claus TV show on Disney Plus, and The Santa Claus is my all-time favorite Christmas movie, so I'm definitely gonna go watch that here soon. Apart from that, this is technically a vlog, even if it will be a month-long vlog, so traditional vlogging things. My book of the month came in today, and my official pick was White Horse by Erica T. Worth. This is the a horror story, and I believe 𝗖cie těch//Worth is a indigenous author, and I know this is some sort of a thriller when our main character's cousin finds like a bracelet that belonged to the main character's mother, and she starts wearing it and experiencing these weird visions. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Along with that one, seeing as how I had an extra credit and it's nonfiction November, I decided to pick up Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zauner. I've heard a million positive reviews about this. Michelle Zauner is a musician, however, this book is diving into her relationship with her mother and the grieving process she had after her mother passed away. Definitely expecting this to make me cry, but also just very excited to pick it up. Along with those, I also went by the library. I checked out She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan like a week ago, but then I got sick, so I never ended up going to the library. Finally picked that up. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about this book in this video, but I'm going to be reading this month for the Story Continued book club. And then I also got Kiss Her Once for Me by Allison Cochran, which is my pick for my personal book club. This is a romance, leads to a marriage of convenience. Maybe? I have no idea. Marriage of convenience, but then she starts falling for the guy's sister. Now that's interesting. Okay, I guess I really should have actually read the summary a while back, and maybe I would have been able to better tell what the story was about. Anyway, so that's it for now. I will talk to you guys again whenever I have started into one of my other nonfiction books. Hey guys, just finished filming another video, so I figured while I was here, let's just film this update also. I have started into We Were Dreamers by Simu Liu. I am buddy reading this with Kristen at Kristen Craves Books. I'll put a link to her in the description. Definitely recommend going to give her a follow. But I am currently about 3 hours in and I am loving this. Not only is Simu Liu's voice so nice, so relaxing. I swear, like that man could read me the phone book and it would sound sexy. He's definitely a lot more laid back than Penn, which I think makes his humor come across a lot drier, but at the same time, I think it works very well with his writing style. So across the board, I've just been really enjoying this as an audiobook and I definitely have to recommend it. He does sort of go chronologically, but after he initially introduces himself, he actually takes a few chapters to go back and really delve into his family's history. He looks at both of his parents' upbringing, he looks at their experiences and kind of utilizes that as a basis to start exploring his upbringing and why his parents acted and treated him the way they did. I will say things are definitely getting a little bit more serious. We are sort of starting to toe that line into familial abuse, but even with that, on the whole, I wouldn't say it really brings down the tone of the story. He still tosses in occasional jokes, makes little funny references. I have to appreciate, as a comic book nerd, how often he makes references to comic books. For example, when he goes into the Gifted and Talented program, he makes a joke about it. It's not the X-Men, and you know, it wasn't a bald man in a wheelchair coming to tell him he is special. On top of that, apparently his school was actually incredibly well known for churning out doctors, whereas, you know, he makes a living as a superhero in tights. Honestly, good planning past that for doing Penn's book and then Simu Liu's, because it's really easy for me to sort of compare and contrast these two as memoirs. And while I appreciate them both, I will say I definitely can see the different writing styles which pair with each of the individuals' personalities very well. And I think it makes that difference more obvious because this is quite different to Penn's writing style and it's making me appreciate it more. In regards to vlogging stuff, I don't have anything too interesting, but I am going to be babysitting my niece and nephew tomorrow and working from my brother's house. So with doing that, I will also probably be able to work on the audiobook some more. Here's hoping, at least. It was one of those days where I was just really looking forward to my glass of wine. Also, Sam's meowing right outside my room, so that's a little distracting. I might, you know, lose my train of thought here or there. Anyway, hey guys, a little sooner update than the last time I talked to you because I officially finished out We Were Dreamers by Simu Liu and I loved it. Just as good as Penn's memoir, but in a very different way. I think this one, you could really see Simu Liu's personality shine through. The comedy was a lot drier, but at the same time, I think it made any emotion he had while reading the book really stand out a lot more. Anytime he would start choking up, I had tears in my eyes. When you could hear him smiling, it made me smile. Overall, it was fantastically done in terms of storytelling. Being a big Marvel fan, obviously I knew about him because of Shang-Chi, but I also have heard of the TV show Kim's Convenience, where he really got his big break in a recurring role. And now I am all the more intrigued to go and search out that TV show. As I said, anytime he would get choked up, it made tears spring to my eyes. This book was both heart-wrenching and made my heart swell all at the same time. I think as far as a memoir goes, this is really inspiring, not just because it has that sort of rags to riches story, as well as that fulfillment of an immigrant family's dream, but also I just think it seemed so incredibly human. And at no point throughout the book did it ever feel like he was shying away from the difficulties he's had throughout his life, whether he was the one causing it or other people in his life were. Like I said, the writing style is really laid back, but at the same time it's very poignant. I was really floored whenever he started to dive into the familial abuse he's experienced, just because at the start of the book he talked about his parents in such a positive way and really seemed like they had a great relationship, but then he explained the angle he was coming at it from, and I thought that was just very refreshing. Trying to be understanding, but at the same time also attempting to utilize his family's experience to educate other families in similar situations. Like I said, sometimes his emotion really shines through in his reading of the story, and you can tell it's not easy for him to talk about his parents abusing him mentally or physically, but again, at the same time, the perspective he came at it just was so interesting and different. I'm really intrigued to read Jennette mccurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, where she also experienced parental abuse, albeit not in the same way, but I'm interested to see how she comes at it and sort of compare and contrast with Simu Liu's way of writing about it. Of course, I loved every single little comic reference he made here and there. He actually talked about writing a TV show based around a X-Men who has an Asian origin. If you know comics, Sunfire. I just thought that was so hilarious, and then how things ended up coming full circle at the end, because obviously he ended up getting cast in a Marvel movie, not for the same character. Also, comparing this one with Kal Penn's memoir, I really appreciate that both of them actually talked about Asian representation in the media and how important it can be. I'm fairly certain Kal Penn is older than Simu Liu, and he has been in Hollywood for a longer time, so it was interesting to see the difference there based on when they got involved in the movie industry and how that affected their experience, but also the difference in Kal Penn getting started in LA, whereas Simu Liu started in Toronto. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to consistently compare these, but when you read a bunch of memoirs all by actors around the same time, it's kind of hard not to compare them. I'm sure I'm gonna do more of that whenever I finally get around to Jennette mccurdy's book. But anyway, basically, I loved this one just as much. It was so fantastic in a different way, but still highly recommend it. Gave it 5 stars. Once again, have to plug the audiobook as the way to go for reading this. It was such a good performance. The acknowledgements made me cry, so just preparing you for that. After I finished that one, I started right into my next audiobook to complete the prompt of Element. My pick was Black Nerd Problems by Omar, Holmon, and William Evans. This is a collection of essays by the creators of I think it's an online publication called Black Nerd Problems. I don't even remember how this got on my TBR, but I can say right now, oh my god, I'm gonna have to buy a physical copy of this. I've been listening to the audiobook. Both of the authors read it. They have some chapters where only one of them is talking. They have other chapters where they're both talking, but thus far I've been having so much fun. The reason I picked this for the prompt of Element is because nerdy stuff is definitely in my element, whereas looking at it from the view of a black nerd is not, obviously. And thus far I am adoring this. The way they discuss fandom culture, how they come at the societal issues that can be incorporated into fandom culture. Right at the beginning, they talk about what it really means to be a nerd. They talk about gatekeeping and nerddom, intersectionality in it, and I'm having such a fun time. This is that societal viewpoint I love talking about when it comes to communications in media. Thus far, every single chapter kind of dives into a different piece of media. Some of them have a more centralized topic, while others ride the line into multiple different ones. Example, one that had me absolutely howling, but I also appreciated so deeply, was from the perspective of William Evans, where he was talking about the TV show The Legend of Korra and the importance that TV show has for him and for his daughter. And just, oh my god, it was so cute, it was so pure, it was so important, but it was also so funny. I appreciate the fact that this is both diving into some serious societal issues, talking about representation in media, the way comic books and TV shows can talk about serious topics, but at the same time, the writing style isn't too stiff educational based. It's very colloquial. It's filled with different pop culture references, not just tying into whatever topic they're talking about that chapter. It's so hilarious. I will say the audiobook might not be for everybody just because they definitely put a lot of emotion into what they're talking about. At some points, you can definitely tell Omar Holmon actually is like having to back up away from the microphone because he's essentially yelling into it. But again, I find it absolutely hilarious. It kind of feels like I'm listening to a podcast rather than an audiobook, and I'm all over it. There's also been discussions on Naruto or another anime that I think was called Food Wars. There was a chapter on Kung Fu Panda, also Into the Spider-Verse. But I mean, again, me being me, my favorites are definitely so far the comic book ones. There was also a full-blown exploration of the Green Lanterns, and I was all over it, talking about how they could so easily have taken the Green Lantern storyline and core to a place of being cop propaganda. There was even a chapter where Omar Holmon actually talked about the difficulty he has in trying to disassociate and escape into fictional worlds when so many of them are starting to reflect serious events in the real world, and how difficult it can be to escape into pieces of media because you're still seeing that same thing represented, just now in the fictional world instead of the real world. If I read this when I was still in college, I could definitely see myself utilizing some of these topics as going off points to create a whole thesis. That's how much I'm enjoying this. Anyway, I've been talking for way too long, and this is gonna be a heck of a time to edit, so I'm gonna go now. But We Were Dreamers, 5 stars. Black Nerd Problems, probably gonna be 5 stars, guessing it now. Hey! So I look a little different. This literally happened today, so please ignore the dye on my forehead, but I just felt like a change. Gonna be very interesting editing some of my videos for the future where I already filmed updates like months ago and have very, very different hair. Anyway, that's not important here. What's important is that I finished out Black Nerd Problems, and oh my god, I really enjoyed it. Still maintain that I need to go buy a physical copy of this book. It was so good. I mean, I did not anticipate that I was going to laugh out loud reading this as often as I did. There was a chapter where these guys were talking about the House of X arc from Marvel, and these men said, "It ain't an X-Men mission until Jean dies." Y'all, I ascended. I laughed so hard. That literally sent me. Oh my god, it was so funny. So not only was this book freaking hilarious, but it was also very heartfelt and insightful. Plus, it definitely made my want to read and want to watch list grow. I will say, it's pretty niche. That's not very surprising right out of the get-go based on just the title and then the synopsis of it. If you're unaware of the pieces of media they're discussing, I could understand you would have a very hard time following. You might have a hard time connecting with the bigger picture they're discussing because you don't really understand the piece of media. Every single one of them revolves around something that's nerdy. Some of them do have discussions on real world issues and the men's own experiences, but then others are effectively just rants. And I will say, those were very entertaining so long as I knew what the piece of media they were talking about was. I think the few times I might have zoned out a little bit was whenever there would be a rant chapter looking at like Dragon Ball Z. I have a passing knowledge of DBZ. I'm not a big fan of it. I also have never watched Game of Thrones, and there were a few chapters talking about it, so I also was a little bit lost here or there. But even with those chapters, every single time the guys would give a little bit of a synopsis, try to explain it to you, but obviously you kind of lose some of the nuance and the in-jokes if you don't really understand what they're talking about. So that can be a problem for a reader. This is another one that I would definitely recommend listening to the audiobook. You definitely can hear the passion that these men have about the topics they're discussing. There were also different chapters where you could really feel the emotion coming through in their narration. For example, there was one chapter where Evans was talking about how he and his dad kind of discussed violence in the real world via fantasy worlds. Or there was another chapter where Omar was remembering his mother who has passed away via talking about a sitcom which helped him deal with his grief. I will definitely admit I got misty-eyed more than once. On the opposite side though, there are also some chapters that are really anger-inducing. For example, Evans talks about going to a Comic-Con and he was hesitant to buy a cosplay sword because he remembered the story of Darian Hunt, a cosplayer who was shot by police because his weapon looked real. Or on the opposite side, Omar Omar talked about his struggle of trying to escape into fantastical worlds during the George Floyd protests because the media he was trying to consume mirrored what was happening in the real world. So while there are those ranty chapters, there are also some really fantastic chapters where they are taking their enjoyment of a piece of media and tying it into something from their real life that gives it so much more power and allows you to connect with them on a deeper level. So all in all, I definitely don't think this book is for everybody because it can be very niche, but I also have to give these men mad respect because they showed my favorite DC animated universe movie, Under the Red Hood, the respect it deserves. On the opposite side, I did have to dock half a star because they praised the CW's Arrow. That shit is disrespectful to Oliver Queen and is basically a renamed Batman TV show. Changed my mind. That's really not why I deducted half a star. But I did give this 4.5 stars. Like I said, definitely a little niche. Some of the ranty chapters did lose my attention, but all in all, I really enjoyed this. I definitely want a physical copy. I want to go through and annotate it. I want to go check out all of these different TV shows and comic book arcs they talked about. It was so good. I highly recommend this one, particularly if you consider yourself a nerdy person. After finishing that one, of course, I had to jump into my final book for the nonfiction readathon, I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I have heard literally nothing but glowing reviews about this book, and I've been so excited. I actually got a physical copy from my friend who bought 2 copies. I've told this story like a million times now. I also realized that the audiobook was available on Scribd, so of course I had to check it out. I've been kind of going back and forth, but one thing I can say thus far is I'm really impressed with McCurdy's writing style in regards to the fact you start when she is a child, and the writing literally feels like you are reading from a child's perspective. I'm actually to about the halfway point, and Jennette is currently 18, so the writing style has actually matured as she's gotten older. It is so frustrating and sad to read from her perspective as a child because all she wants is to make her mother happy. All she wants is to help provide for her family. And even people in her family make comments like, you should be allowed to be a kid. You shouldn't have to have this burden on your shoulders. And she just doesn't understand that. Like, she genuinely cannot understand not being concerned for her family's well-being, even though she is literally a child. Not to mention the emotional manipulation her mom does is just like, oh, it's so gross. And it's so difficult because you can tell McCurdy does love her mom. But at the same time, by this point in the book, she's starting to realize, like, this is not healthy. This is not normal anymore. She's finally taking notice of these issues and things her mom does to control her, and she's finally starting to put her foot down. Along with that, we also see her struggles in trying to enter Hollywood, and whenever she eventually gets her role on iCarly, the creator of iCarly hasn't done anything specifically on page wrong, but some things that definitely feel like they're toeing the line and just getting a little too close to inappropriate and creepy. I know I'm like the last person to read this book, but also, I mean, major content warnings for eating disorders in this. It's pretty heavy. I feel so terrible for her. She actually has OCD, which I didn't know about, and her OCD most often manifests around her eating habits, which is just a terrifying combo. Her mother actively exacerbates and encourages her eating disorder, which is completely disgusting. Yeah, so I just want like that all out there, but across the board though, I can't stop listening to it. It's so good. I really am, I don't want to say enjoying this book, but like I am taking in the story and don't want to stop. I don't know what term I want to use here, but I will say McCurdy is definitely a very strong writer, very powerful stuff that's being discussed. It's lots of punches in the gut. That is it for now. I will update you guys again, maybe before I finish this book, or it might just be when I finish this book. We'll see. Honestly, I really thought it was going to take me longer to get through all of these, but I've kind of just shot through every single one of them. Hey y'all, so I officially finished out my last book for the Nonfiction November readathon. Proud of myself. So I realized I don't think I said that I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy was fulfilling the prompt of secret, because obviously like her mom being so abusive was clearly a secret in her life. Can I just say this is like compulsively readable, even though it is is incredibly stomach churning. I mean, I spent a majority of yesterday reading this book, whether I was reading it physically or via audio. And on top of that, I am glad that I continued to listen on audio a little bit more, because I actually hit the point where she finally showcased emotion in her reading. And as soon as she got choked up, it just was instant tears to my eyes. And I really feel for Jennette. I'm so incredibly sad that she had to experience such terrible things. And I think she is a very brave person to talk about something with such candor, particularly at the end of the book. I think she just handled the entire situation very well. She's just so honest and raw. Like, the end of this book is not the most satisfying, but I do think it's the most realistic to the story being told. I don't think I talked about previously, but honestly, I loved iCarly when I was younger. I tried to rewatch it a few months ago, and it definitely doesn't really hold up as well as an adult. Sam was my favorite character. So it was just doubly heartbreaking to read about these experiences that she went through in her life. And for me personally, it made me able to connect with her a lot more. And then obviously I've just discussed eating disorders on my channel prior, that I actually utilized the representation of female bodies in media, specifically advertising, for my thesis that I did in college. So I also was able to look at this from an educational standpoint with that sort of a background. But overall, it just was so fantastically written. It's done chronologically, but it's almost like vignettes throughout her life. Like I said, it's heartbreaking, it's stomach churning. It was fantastic. I could not put it down. I had to keep reading, especially when I hit the after section where her mom had died. So while this definitely has a host of triggers and content warnings you should definitely consider looking into, I highly recommend it. Very sad book, but it was also just fantastically done. So honest, so raw. I understand why everybody has been praising this so much. I really struggled with what to rate this, just because the ending isn't super satisfying. My overall experience with this book was 5 stars, so I just had to give it 5 stars. It was so good, which is such a weird thing to say when this book was so heart-wrenching for the entire time. And with that, I have officially finished out my nonfiction November readathon. So I am very proud of myself. I read all 4 of these books, and I'm so glad to see that all 4 of them were higher than 4 stars, which is fantastic. I did fairly good with reading nonfiction books this year, so here's hoping that that trend continues next year. Anyway, so that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all of my socials, as well as a few ways you can support me, linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!